Welcome to Shop Talk Live, Fine Woodworking Magazine's bi-weekly podcast. I'm senior web producer Ed Pernick, and joining me today are the usual suspects, executive art director Mike Bekovich.
Hey guys.
And senior editor Matt Kenny.
Hello.
Also known as Fatty Magoo here in the office. If you like this podcast, be sure to spread the word to your fellow woodworkers. Stop by our iTunes page, leave a comment, maybe a sweet 5-star rating if you think we deserve it. You can even catch us on iHeartRadio. You all know the drill by now. It's only been about 4 years. So let's get this party started.
Really, 4 years?
It's been 4 years.
Wow.
Something like that, or 3.5, something like that, but pretty close. I got a couple of things to get out of the way really quickly, and then Matt has some actually interesting segue news.
That's right. I do.
So the first is that I went to a parent-teacher conference at my daughter's pre-K school today, and she showed me her workbench. They have a workbench in the classroom, and it has a real cast iron vise on it.
Cool.
And you can hammer things and screw and unscrew things. And so I told her that I would mention it on the podcast, and that I would probably post a picture of her at her workbench on the blog post for this podcast. So if you see a random picture of a little kid at a workbench, the reason that's there is because I promised Gwen that Papa would put that up.
All right.
The second thing is I felt like an oaf on the last podcast when I talked about that prop cherry cabinet I had to make for your upcoming hinge routing jig video.
Let's make it very clear that you made that cabinet and not me.
And I didn't have it with me. So there's the cabinet. See, I brought something for once.
Yes.
And it has a few issues because it was built very quickly. And I actually had to build a cabinet around a door, which is never an easy feat because I had an old door that wasn't being used on a project.
So you started with the door.
So I had the door.
That is tough.
And I made all these, and I got close. I got so close, but the door is about maybe 1/8 of an inch, not wide, too narrow from left to right. So the case is ever so slightly wider, which really ticked me off, which means this is going to get relegated to my daughter's bedroom.
That's cool. No, is this upside down right now?
This is, no, Mike, it's not. Why?
Is it
nothing.
backside?
Because of the side that I put the hinges on?
No, just because
there's a reason for
the upper rail is wider than the lower rail.
Oh, no, it is upside down.
Okay.
No, you're right.
Yeah.
Much
There you go.
better, thank you.
Okay, there you go. Sorry. Duh. Anyhow, so that's the little cabinet.
I like the pine backboards. I've been using pine a lot for backboards in my cases and stuff.
Yeah. What was interesting about this was I wanted to make it look somewhat interesting. I didn't have time to do like a shiplap beaded back panel, so I took a rip blade on the table saw, tilted it to 45 degrees, and just cut little V's in a solid pine panel, and it just gave it a little bit of,
oh, cool. Okay.
Something to look at.
A little bit of zazzle.
You gave that more room to move than the last little cabinet with the pine panel you made.
And that's where the door came from. So originally I had a cabinet of the same proportions, and I put a pine panel in the back, and I gave it about 1/8 of an inch of space on either side in the groove that it was rested in.
Plenty of room.
I thought it was.
Yep.
But you made it in our fine woodworking shop in the
winter. I made
winter.
it in the winter, and our shop is notoriously dry.
Like 10% humidity.
And it expanded so much come summertime that it busted the dovetails apart. Yeah. And I was just talking to Mike the other day. I was like, Mike, so I have this cabinet. I really like it. And it's got a little drawer with a spalted maple drawer front. It came out really nice, except for the fact that it started to bulge out and bust all the dovetails.
Yeah, those dovetails were busted out a good 1/4 inch.
Yeah, and I believe your response of how do I fix this? What do I do with this?
Burn it.
Burn it. That's right.
I think I'm going to have one of you come into the shop one day, and I'll have you take it away because I don't have the heart to do it.
I'll break it.
You can break it?
I'll break it.
Maybe we should break it on the podcast.
That'd be fun.
You would enjoy breaking some of my stuff on the podcast.
I enjoy breaking your heart on the podcast.
Anyhow.
I don't know what that means.
So, Matt, you just came back from Las Vegas.
I did, yes.
Why on earth were you in Las Vegas?
Bonus. No.
Sweet.
I was there for the AWFS show, which is redundant because the S stands for show, but I don't know what the rest of it stands for. I think it's American
Woodworking.
Wood and Furniture Show.
Furniture,
or something like that. But it's like the IWF down in Atlanta. They alternate each year. And what it is a trade show where, by and large, it's manufacturers and vendors that service industrial woodworking.
Usually it's bigger stuff, CNC machines, that kind of stuff.
CNC machines are big there. Machines that you could like literally feed boards into and get finished flooring out the other end. I've seen those at the show before. There's people that do, spray booths. Sprayers are there. A lot of people that make custom tooling for machinery are there, carbide tooling and so forth. But then there's also companies that we as, one-man shops would be more familiar with. So General International was there, Rikon was there, Lee Valley Veritas is there, Bosch was there with their new table saw with the saw, blade breaking technology.
Wait, was SawStop there too?
SawStop was there too.
How close were their booths?
Well, there was blood spilled.
Nice.
No, their booths were not close to each other. So there are also, brands that you'd be more familiar with, but it's fewer and fewer of those each time I go. And it becomes more and more dominated by big, companies that service industrial and commercial shops.
Right.
So
these are like
machines
$300,000,
that cost
$400,000, $600,000 machines.
$3, $4, or $5 million machines.
Are some of them that expensive?
I would think so.
They're like room-sized machines. Like you said, you put in a tree in one end and get a chair coming out the other end.
I mean, like this year they had stuff. There was one company they were selling a machine that would turn all your chips and dust into biobricks or something comparable to a biobrick.
They heard me on the podcast.
That's right.
Do you remember I wanted to take all of our sawdust and make...
Yeah, how much was that? Because I'll take one of those.
It was only $50.
Cool.
I bought one. No, and then they had there was a machine there that made custom sized cardboard boxes. So it's really about manufacturing. But I did meet several podcast listeners there. I'd go to a booth. Part of what the reason we go there is we go there and we meet people who make tools that we would like to review, and so we go and say, okay, what do you got coming out that's new?
Right.
And we also go there. It's an opportunity for us to meet and greet advertisers from the magazine who generally we never really speak to because there's a sort of a wall between editorial and advertising. So it's just a chance to meet them and greet them. But I did meet several podcast listeners. One of them is a young fellow named Jeremy Pringle from Lee Valley Veritas. He was a nice young man, and he knew a lot about the podcast. A lot. Almost a disturbing amount about the podcast, or me in particular. But he was a nice guy, and
he knows what color Carhartt underpants Mike wears.
Yes, I had a chance. I went out to dinner, and we had dinner together along with the other Lee Valley guys, and had a drink together. And another one of the Lee Valley guys was a podcast listener. But then there's Jake Lee, who worked for Lee Valley, does not listen to the podcast, so screw him.
Well, moving right along.
And then, the guy that reps Cinco was a podcast listener.
Well, I'm sure all of our listeners are finding this fascinating.
Right. Well, AWF is kind of cool. I wouldn't go personally if AWF is again in Las Vegas in 2 years. I will not be going. I will pass that off on because Las Vegas is a horrible place.
We just lost our 3 listeners from Las Vegas.
I mean, it is a horrible place.
Okay. Very uncomfortable here. I'm going to move on to the first question of the day. Actually, but before we get that, a little love to our sponsor. For more than 100 years, Minwax has been the leading brand of high-quality wood finishing and wood care products, from wood stains to clear protective finishes, plus solutions for wood preparation, maintenance, cleaning, and repair. Minwax products are requested by the do-it-yourself consumer, seasoned woodworkers, and professional contractors. You can find Minwax online at minwax.com or on Facebook, Twitter, and Pinterest.
Just let me tell you quickly.
Oh, boy.
The coolest things I saw, because you didn't even ask me that.
I was going to.
Yeah, so the coolest things
I got the
saw,
impression that it was kind of a snooze.
Well, no. No.
Get on with it, man.
So we did get to see the new Bosch table saw with the blade stopping technology. We asked them about the lawsuit. They declined to address it.
Are they selling the saw yet, or have plans to?
It's supposed to come out in the fall.
Is any legal things holding up the sale of the tool? Do you know?
Well, right now, I think not, but I wouldn't be surprised if SawStop asked for an injunction. We talked to SawStop, and we asked them about the lawsuit. But we didn't get. It's not like they were. They're not. None of those guys are the lawyers representing the companies, so they're not really going to tell you anything substantive because they probably don't know anything substantive. Right. Veritas has some really cool stuff coming out. One is a miter plane. So it's not a dedicated shooting board plane like they already have out. It's a miter plane, which can be used both on a shooting board and as like a big block plane. It's really cool.
How does that differ either from a low angle jack or smoother?
Well, I have that number 9 iron miter plane.
The box thing.
It's more like that, but the Lee Valley twist to it. So it's got the Lee Valley curves and everything, and it's pretty cool. I saw it actually. I saw a prototype of it last fall when I was visiting the factory, but I wasn't allowed to mention it. So they have that coming out, and they actually have a really cool beating tool that's a reproduction of an old, I think it was an old Preston design. It's really cool. It's only going to be like $30 too.
Oh, cool.
That sounds
really
nice.
Does it look like a spoke shave?
Does it look like my Stanley 55?
No, it does not. It looks a little bit like a spoke shave. A little bit, yeah.
What is that? The Stanley 66 beater, with those little vertical blades that go in?
A little bit like that, yeah.
Cool.
And what else? We saw a really cool Forstner bit that actually was. I mean, this was actually a really cool Forstner bit. It really was.
That's a woodworker's conversation. I saw a really cool Forstner bit.
Yes, yeah. And there was some really awesome furniture on display that were made by college and high school students from around the country at the annual Fresh Wood contest.
Nice.
All right, well, here we go. First question comes from George. He writes, "Hi, fellas. I'm using a very sharp Wood River 5.5 on a shooting board and experiencing chip out at the end of a workpiece. How may I stop this from happening?" So, sounds to me like he's got a fence issue.
Yeah, but I love how he tells us that it's very sharp because...
are you wagering?
No, I'm not. No, not at all. Because I've met a lot of people this summer that listen to the podcast, and almost all of them have commented, "You guys seem to answer a lot of questions by telling people that their planes or their tools aren't sharp enough." It's like, well, it's it's a good chance. No, I don't think it's a sharpness issue. I think it's that his fence, where he's taken the shaving off the end of the board, is not being backed up by the fence on his shooting board.
I wonder if there's a chamfer on that. I wonder if he chamfered the...
If he chamfered the
sharp ends of
that
the
end
fence.
Of the front side of the fence, that would have been that would be not a good thing. So you'd want to make a new fence or cut the fence.
Yeah.
It could also be that there's a lot of issues. One of the things is that when you are using
you could be sticking the workpiece out a little bit too far from the fence. It could be that when in using your shooting board, and you cut a little bit. If he has a standard shooting board, you cut a little bit into that vertical wall of the runway. Yeah.
And it could be that he had his blade projected too far once, and now his blade is projected less.
Right.
So it's just cutting slightly before where the fence is.
Yep.
So he's got to clean up that little runway.
Yeah, down at the bottom of that runway on the vertical wall, there will be a tiny little strip of wood that has never been cut because your blade doesn't extend all the way to the edge of the body.
So what do you do? Just hit that with the shoulder plane?
The shoulder plane, yep.
And then you sort of reestablish that little step.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Yeah. So that's what you'd want to do. It's hard to determine exactly what the problem is because we don't have the shooting board in front of us. But
and make sure you're sharp.
And make sure you're sharp, yes.
Well, why don't you keep that answer in your hip pockets? Because Dave writes for our second question, "I recently made several end grain cutting boards from cherry and walnut with excellent results. However, flattening them was like rowing a boat against a strong headwind. I first used a belt sander. God, I hate belt sanders. They always leave what seems like permanent scratch marks. Then I tried my old favorite Stanley No. 4 with a Lee Nielsen blade sharpened on an 8,000 grit Waterstone. It also worked, but took forever to flatten both sides, leaving me with sore arms and a bad disposition. After researching toothed plane irons, I wondered if that would speed up the flattening process. Could one work in my old No. 4? Should I just find a friend with a drum sander? I know I've probably answered my own question, but still..." Ellipse.
I'm curious to what he thinks the answer would be if he thinks he already answered it.
Which one? Yeah.
Well,
there are two possible answers in there.
Maybe we should just leave it at that then.
Yeah.
So for our first segment of the day,
drum sander is not a bad way to go. End grain is just tough to remove. I would say your first step is it's sort of like the first time you have to plane like an end grain glue up. The next time your glue up is going to be a lot flatter.
Yes, and a lot better.
So, start off by gluing as absolutely flat as you can. And then your two options are, belt sanders you mentioned. And if I'm going to go with a hand plane, probably a low angle hand plane is going to slice through those end grain fibers with a little less resistance. I mean, that's where the term block plane comes from. I mean, from truing up butcher blocks. The lower angle is going to slice through the end grain a little bit better. And you've probably already found out, if you've done this before, that you want to work from the edges toward the center so you're not blowing out those end grain fibers as you plane off the edge. And other than that, it's just a lot of tough work.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, I've done a fair amount of end grain work recently, and so one thing I've learned is if you have a genuinely sharp plane, and I mean sharp, right? Not an approximation of sharp, but a genuinely sharp plane. I have been planing through end grain and not getting tear out. You have to have a light cut.
You mean going off the edge?
Yeah, going off the edge.
Oh.
You need to have a really light cut, and you can plane off the edge. The other thing you can do is score the edge all the way around it. And as long as, if you score it around and keep that straight, you can plane down to that score line without getting tear out.
What do you mean score?
Like cut it with a knife.
Like a marking gauge or something?
Yeah, marking gauge or something.
Oh, right,
yeah.
Okay.
So you could do that. And a low angle, so you said a low angle jack, right?
Yep.
A low angle jack, and make sure it's actually truly sharp.
Yep.
Toothed plane iron?
I don't know if that'd work. It works really well on highly figured woods to prevent tear out.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, amazingly well. I've never heard of it used on end grain.
Yeah, I don't know, and I don't know if anyone makes one for a number 4. So you probably would have to make one yourself. Yeah. I mean, the ones that Lee Nielsen makes and sells, I believe, are for their bevel up jack plane and so forth. I don't think they make one for a...
They also sell that scraper plane, which is available with a tooth blade as well.
Yeah.
Or used to be.
But I would say, so we're agreed. Bevel up, jack plane, make sure
you're dull.
Or
sharp.
Yes.
Friend with drum sander.
Or a friend with a drum sander. That'll take a long time, too.
Okay, I say we head into our first segment of the day, and this is going to be maybe a one-off segment. I don't know. I'm tentatively calling it Ask the Master because I received a question. Actually, I received a few questions concerning the use of Gorilla Glue after Craig Thibodeau mentioned his love of the stuff. So we thought we'd go straight to the horse's mouth and call Craig up and get him to expand upon what he does with Gorilla Glue. So here's the question. It's from Ed, not Pernick. In episode 88, Craig Thibodeau offers his opinion on Gorilla Polyurethane Glue, the stuff that's water-activated and expands when it touches water. He states that when used correctly, it's the greatest of all glues, and I think he may have stated that not all people use it correctly. So what is the correct way to use this glue? Is it different than what's stated in the directions, or does he have some techniques that he employs that aren't apparent to the occasional user? So to answer this question, we're bringing on Craig Thibodeau, and we'll see if modern technology can bring us online with him. Craig?
Good morning, guys. How's it going?
It's going well. So I have received, honestly, several questions about how on earth do you use Gorilla Glue in woodworking, because I think at least, I don't know, maybe everyone in this room, except for you, that's tried to use it has gotten it like a foamy, sloppy, disgusting mess. So what's the deal?
Well, it still does take some practice. I noticed one of the questions asked about whether or not to use it with marquetry, and that is the one place I don't ever use it, primarily because the foam ends up getting in the saw curves in between the flowers and leaves and stuff. When it comes to using it with solid woodworking, it works very much like yellow glue. You squeeze it into a domino hole or a biscuit slot, and you spread it around a little bit. Roll your domino or biscuit in a damp paper towel and stuff it in. The foam, when it does come out, it's pretty easy to clean off. It's not staining. It cuts easy with the chisel, and it sands off pretty quick. So even if you do get a bunch of foam squirting out everywhere, it's not the end of the world. You can clean it off, but it probably means that you use too much glue.
So why use it over yellow glue?
A couple of reasons. The reason I primarily use it for solid woodworking joints like biscuits or dominoes or dovetails or mortise and tenons is because it's slippery. It doesn't have the initial tack that makes things stop moving that yellow glue has. I got a train coming by, so hold on just a second.
This is fascinating podcast.
Sorry about that. So what it does is it allows you to slide things together. Like if you have a sliding dovetail where you would normally not want to put very much yellow glue on that, or you'd have to move really fast to get it together before the glue starts to tack. Mm-hmm. Gorilla Glue doesn't do that. It really makes things slippery so they can slide together easy, whether it's dominoes or dovetails or mortise and tenon joints. If you have tight dovetails on a dovetail drawer, Gorilla Glue allows the parts to slide together in a way that yellow glue doesn't.
And do you just clean it with water?
You mean after it squeezes out all over the place?
Yeah. So you bring a joint together. You've got a certain amount of squeeze out. Do you let it dry up a bit? Like with yellow glue, a lot of us will wait for it to gel up and then sort of peel it away. What do you do with Gorilla Glue?
With Gorilla Glue, you really are best off if you don't touch it. If it squeezes out and starts to drip all over, just let it do it. It'll be easy enough to clean up the hardened foam afterwards. It tends to smear and basically get on everything if you start to try and wipe it up. Mm-hmm. You can try to wipe it up with denatured alcohol, but I don't do it because I find it pushes it into the grain, and then it does become more of an issue to sand it out of the grain.
Right.
So I tend to just let it foam and let it do its thing. You'll know after using it a couple times whether you're using too much glue. If you put a mortise and tenon joint together and you've got foam pouring down the leg 20 minutes later, and that's about how long it would take, you'll know, okay, I put way too much glue in there. It didn't need that much glue.
Okay.
So next time, you just use a little bit less glue.
All right. Fair enough. There you go. There's your answer. Whoever that was who wrote us that question, and I can't recall the name.
Ed.
Ed. Oh, God, you would think I would have remembered that name. Anyhow, all right, Craig. Well, thanks very much.
I'm allowed to ask your own questions on the podcast. I thought you had to take, listener questions.
Yeah, I think most of the questions actually come from Ed, and he just assigns different names to them.
Yeah, to Ed, Edwina.
Edwin.
Yes.
All right, Craig. Well, thanks very much.
My pleasure, guys.
All right. Take it easy.
Thanks.
All right, guys. So observations and reflections about Gorilla Glue.
Well,
I'm not sold.
I've used it some recently to make mini curved panel doors.
You've used it to make curved panel doors?
What?
You said
yes. Did I say something? Yes.
You done make something? You done gonna make
that
something?
That was my my Schmegel voice there. So I used it to make curved panel doors because it's a rigid glue line and it doesn't have water in it. So it doesn't cause expansion and contraction problems either.
Which can actually change the shape of your curve.
Can change the radius of the curve, as I found out.
But as it expands when it foams, though, couldn't that potentially mess
it's in
up
a vacuum press? So the vacuum's keeping it under tremendous.
The vacuum can
pressure.
overcome it.
Yeah.
I'm more concerned with the environmental issues. I mean, how many gorillas are actually left in the wild that we're making glue out of them?
Gorillas.
Like
Who cares?
That joke is
really? Who cares?
Ed quality joke.
Yeah, I know. Sorry.
So let me just say this. But what I've discovered about Gorilla Glue is that you can spread it on in a very consistently thin layer, which is really nice. And it does, in fact, offer some lubricating qualities that it, as Craig mentioned.
Do you have a longer open time? Does it, a lot of times if you go really thin with yellow glue, you worry about that thing sort of skinning over or tacking up before you get your joint together.
No, I don't think so. But to be honest, I haven't used it yet on traditional joinery. It's been to make in veneering. Making these curved panels. And, so a curved panel, you might have to spread glue 6 or 7, 8 times over, a fairly large area.
Right.
And I've not had any trouble with those panels. So, I would think not for, a mortise and tenon joint. It only takes a few seconds to put it together.
It would be interesting to put together a little blog on this. Like if we were to assemble a couple of different joints, just like test joints, and then see how difficult it is to deal with the squeeze out afterwards. Because Craig seems to say that you just let it dry and chip it right off with a chisel.
Yeah,
and it's gone.
mean, like you said, a lot of us tried it when it first came out, and I used it for a little while, and I don't know why I stopped using it, except probably the mess factor.
Yeah.
Well, there's another reason I would not use it on a regular basis, is that in terms of cost, it's significantly.
Maybe that's why I don't use it either.
It's more expensive than Type Bond 1.
But the slippery factor is a really cool thing, especially he mentioned like the long sliding dovetail joints. That's cool. Quite a few folks I know use liquid high glue for that exact reason as well. Slightly longer open time, and it's really slippery. It doesn't have the same.
Tim Rousseau, he likes old brown glue for that reason. Yeah. All right. Should we move on?
Sure. Very cool.
Yeah. All right, here we go. So, Glenn wrote, I was hoping you could weigh in on dust collection at the router table. I saw Matt's video on the below table dust collection, but I'm wondering if it's better to hook up my router table to my 5 horsepower Cyclone or to have a dedicated shop vac for the table. I have a Jessam table and fence, and it's got a 2.5-inch port on the back. I plan on adding collection below the table like Matt, but I've heard that the high-velocity suction from a regular vac is better for small-diameter hookups than what you would get off a Cyclone. What do you all do? So what's better, a smaller shop vac or a big old honking Cyclone hooked up to that router table?
Well, I think a 5 horsepower Cyclone would have absolutely no trouble with the router table. It might actually suck your router into the Cyclone. But on my router table, so I also have that 2.5-inch port on the back of the fence, but that routes directly down into a port underneath my table, and then a 4-inch hose hooks up to that port. So the 4-inch hose is actually pulling from under the table and also through the 2.5-inch port above the table in the back of the fence. I have absolutely no trouble with dust on my router table. Zero.
Wow.
None. It gets it all. So I would say just hook up your 5 horsepower Cyclone and use the same port.
Same thing. Collect both from the fence and from underneath.
Yes, instead of trying to have, that's what you want to do. And you can, if you watch the video, I don't know if we mentioned where I got all of those.
I believe
hookups.
We either in the video or in the associated text. But this is a video, you can look it up online. It's something about maximizing dust collection at your router table, and it's Matt in his basement, and there's a medieval stone wall in the background.
Not my basement, it's my garage.
Or in his garage, and there's a medieval stone wall in the background.
But it all came from Rockler. They sell a particular port at Rockler that has both a 4-inch outlet and it also has a 2.5-inch inlet for it. So I will note that after a picture of that from that video ran in the magazine table of contents, and I got a call from the guy that taught me to make furniture, and he said, Matt, what's happening up in Connecticut? You seem to have gained lots of weight. I was like, I think it's just the shirt. The shirt's kind of baggy.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Wasn't the color of your shirt once augmented in an article, and somebody made fun of you for?
It was on a cover of issue 205, I believe. Was that the issue we were looking at earlier?
Yes, it was. Yep.
Now, what color was your shirt originally in that photograph?
Like a really light gray.
It was a tan.
Okay.
It was gray.
And you're hand planing over a bench, something like that,
No,
right?
he's tightening a vise.
Tightening a vise.
Yeah.
And why was the decision made to alter the color a little bit? It was just the design sensibility or something?
Yeah, we just wanted that to pop a little bit, so we went more with, I guess, sort of a prison yard blue.
Like a light blue.
Yes.
And somebody called. What was it they called you?
The
Some
guy
who wrote in.
He wrote in on his custom made personalized stationery.
Nice.
And called me a dandy. This guy thought that the Fine Woodworking had used a male model on the cover of the magazine.
Well, that's a compliment, man.
Yeah.
Yes. He said
how
that,
handsome you are, Matt.
He said the cuffs on my linen shirt were crisper than my dovetails, and something about designer eyeglasses, and a few other comments.
That's great.
Yeah.
Do you still have that letter?
I don't know if I do or don't. I might have got rid of it.
I would have framed that thing and hung it on the wall.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, I wrote a letter to my dad. I got very angry when I was like 5, and I wrote a little note, and I put it in his briefcase, and the note said, YOR space DUM. And because I thought I was making a statement, like, you're dumb, right? And of course, I massacred the English language, and he subsequently matted it and framed it. And that made me more irate. But anyhow, all right. So let's move on to the next question. It comes from Aaron. And he writes, I'm in the process of building an approximately 8-foot by 3.5-foot live edge kitchen table from 2 1.5-inch walnut slabs that will be joined with floating tenons. I was surprised at the approximately 1/4 inch of twist that appeared in one slab once it had acclimated. I thought walnut was highly stable in such a large size. In any case, I'm letting the slabs acclimate in their final environment before flattening them with hand planes and gluing them together. I'll then use a simple tapered leg with a grooved apron and buttons to hold the top to the frame. My question, given that I have acclimated the slabs to our summer kitchen and that we heat with wood in the winter, what options do I have for the aprons to ensure they're strong enough to handle the inevitable seasonal changes in the tabletop? How much movement should I expect and in what direction? So first of all, stability of walnut in a big honkin' slab.
It's a big piece. It's going to move.
A lot?
There's the thicker the stock, sort of the more internal tensions you have. If you picture a little piece of veneer, a 16th inch thick, and it's cupped, you can straighten that sucker out pretty easily just with light hand pressure. But if you have an 8-quarter board with the cup in it, you're not going to straighten that out. So basically, when this thing wants to move, it's going to move. And
the bigger the board, the more it moves.
Yeah. So the question is, and I think it's a good question, if you're just running grooves along the inside of your apron and you've got these little buttons that you screw down, is that going to pull it up? Yeah, it really seriously could. You might just, yank that thing right off of there.
So first, if he wants to really dial in the wood movement that he can expect, he needs to get a wood movement calculator of some sort. Lee Valley sells one that's like a spinning wheel. That's
We've got a good article online. I think it was a Chris Bexford article, too, that had a little table in it. That was all about calculating wood movement.
Right.
Basically, it's going to move a lot.
Yes.
And not only is it going to move across its width as it becomes more humid, it's also going to want to cup in the direction.
It wants to flatten out the rings, right?
As it dries, it's going to cup away from the heart.
Yes.
If you were to flatten this in the wintertime when it's really dry, as it got moisture, it would actually cup toward the heart.
Yes.
So most people think wood always cups away from the heart. It's only because the majority of the time the wood continues to dry a little bit after you mill it, lose moisture. So that's why we tend to think of wood cupping away from the heart, which this is definitely going to do if it's humid now and it starts to dry out in the wintertime.
Exactly, especially if you're using a wood stove. There's going to be a lot of movement.
Yeah.
But also, we thought, I thought at least, that he might want to rethink the design of the base.
So he mentioned tapered legs and traditional aprons going around, right?
Yeah. So on the one hand, if you're going to use a big slab, live edge slab, a more fitting design for the base might be a trestle base, something in the Nakashima vein. But also with a trestle base, you start to get into joinery options for joining the table to the base that aren't there for a traditional leg and apron style.
So options that'll both keep it flat while allowing it to move across the length, the width.
Options including?
So like if you have the two big trestle members at the horizontal trestle members at the top of your trestles at either end.
The ones that go across the grain.
They go across the grain. You could put the male part of a sliding dovetail on top of that, and then in each half of the table, route the female part, and then slide them on from the outside. So you would never see the sliding dovetail, but that sliding dovetail would really help keep it flat. And you could, in a nice way, have that trestle member come almost the full width of the top.
Sure.
And so you would have that sliding dovetail almost the full width of the top, keeping it flat.
Right.
And then you would have different options for how to join it in the middle. You don't have to glue it together, or you could just edge glue it together. You don't really need dominoes at that point or loose tenons, he said. So that's one option. That would, in a trestle base, you could make a little bit beefier, and which would also help keep it flat, but also would be maybe more fitting with the the look of the top
aesthetic,
anyways.
right.
Yeah, the aesthetic of the top.
And Mike, you were talking hardware screws. In the same vein, on a trestle top.
Mike said hex head
two long
lag bolts screwed in from the top.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doubled up with some epoxy in the lag bolt holes.
You can screw through that the upper arm of the trestle with elongated holes at the ends to let that move a little bit. Andrew Hunter did an article a while back on connecting tabletops with, I think, dovetail cleats. And you don't have to stop that dovetail groove short. You can run it all the way across.
You could, yeah. I think, but on a live edge, what's nice about the way Andrew Hunter did.
His was nice and square. Yeah. Yep.
Exactly.
We just lost Matt's mic.
Whoops. Now I just punched myself in the face with the mic.
There you go. This is a very professional podcast, isn't it, Matt?
This is. I think this is actually just a very subtle and passive-aggressive way to
get you off the podcast.
Well, we got to let him talk, but we're just going to kill his mic.
Looks like somebody needs new XLR cables.
Yes.
All right, so listen, let's head into the next segment of the day, and that's going to be all-time favorite tool of all time for this week, where we wax poetic about some of our favorite, most cherished, and beloved tools.
Now, we should point out, Mike, right?
Yes.
We should point out that Ed did not tell us ahead of time that we were going to be doing this segment.
And that's fair. We're still getting used to this whole video component, and I should have given you, we should be deciding a few days before the podcast which segments we're going to be doing.
So we can have
this is an organic.
Yeah.
We're working this out.
I changed my mind. I have a new favorite tool of the week.
Okay, wait, hold on. What do you think it is? Like Bounty paper towels or something?
Wristbands.
Wristbands.
No, I hope I didn't mention it before. What reminded me of it is when you were talking about Veritas Lee Valley coming out with new stuff.
Yeah.
And one of their newer products that I've been using quite a bit as of late is a new attachment for their Mark II honing guide, which are side clamping jaws for chisels, because that's always been the biggest knock for me on the Mark II, which is a really good guide for plane irons, is that chisels tended to pivot too much under that sort of top clamping bars.
Yeah.
So you take off the top clamping bar attachment, you add on the side clamping jaw attachment, it holds every freaking chisel I own.
Yes.
Even the square-sided ones, the skinny ones, the dovetail-shaped profiles that I usually use the cheapy side clamping guide for all that, but a lot of times the chisels won't work, so you end up honing those by hand. Not anymore.
Yeah,
this thing works really, really well.
I have always had the MK2 honing guide, and after you reviewed it for the magazine, and I knew how good it was, I ordered the whole new complete set, which is like $120. Now I have a dedicated side clamping one, wobble wheel one,
camber
wheel,
top clamping,
and then
blades.
The top clamping one. All three of them are complete, and that is awesome. That thing is awesome. I did like 15 chisels in one night because I was like, holy cow, I can finally. And you know what chisels? It sharpened really well. And this brings us to my favorite tool.
Your handmade Japanese chisels.
My handmade Japanese chisels, which have a triangular cross-section for getting in the dovetails.
Right.
And it sharpened those things amazingly well. Yep. And those chisels, once sharpened, were freaking awesome. I used them cleaning up tails on a shaker cupboard that I made 2 weeks ago for a photo shoot for the magazine, and I had a lot of dovetails to get down into and clean those corners out. I just pulled out that wonderful chisel made by I can't remember his name.
Oh, he's on a mountaintop somewhere going.
I think Yamahito. No, it's Tomohito.
Tomohito is right. He sells them.
Yamahiro is the guy's name.
That sounds right.
Yeah, Yamahiro, and they're awesome. Beautiful. They have kind of short blades. It's kind of like a Japanese push chisel, which normally have long handles and short blades, and they really offer a lot of finesse and control. But instead of just being like a paring chisel profile, I had them made with a dovetail profile. Now you can buy Japanese chisels with that dovetail profile, but normally they're short, sort of chopping chisels. Mm-hmm. And I wanted something that could just push nice and easy. So I got that. And actually, if you go to my Instagram account,
God, no more plugs.
Kenny.Matt, there's a video of me using that.
You got to be careful looking for that Instagram account because there's also a nude male model by the same name, apparently.
Well, no, that guy's, there is.
A Playgirl model.
A Playgirl model, but I think he goes by Matthew Kinney.
Oh, really? Okay.
Don't
ask me how I know this.
There's a famous chef named Matthew Kinney. And I don't know how famous he is, but he's like a celebrity chef, just like a D-level celebrity chef.
Yeah.
And then there's the male model named Matt Kinney.
Okay.
Yes. And then there's me. And if you Google, you get all three.
Right in the top row.
That's right. Yeah,
well,
because people have told me about that.
I went to a flea market down the street from where I live a few weeks ago, and I picked up some awesome, really old, probably turn of the 20th century wooden-handled screwdrivers. The blades on them were in fine shape, no chips, dings, nothing like that. But the handles had this luscious, scratched, dented patina, and there's just something about adjusting, a plain iron or whatever it is you're using them for with an old, super old screwdriver instead of the typical Craftsman plastic handle. Like,
are they the kind where the wood is sort of in two halves on either side of sort of a metal?
They're scales.
They're sort of squarish.
Okay.
In there, and then the end is rounded, but it's got more of a squarish profile, and then it kind of goes into a little waist and then flares out again like the beginning of a door pull, like a shaker door pull.
I can almost see that in my head. If there were only a way for us to show the people listening to the podcast what it looked like.
Well,
unfortunately, we can't do that.
I have one right here, actually. Here it is. There it is.
It's amazing.
What do you think? Nice?
Didn't we run an article once upon a time
screwdriver?
on tuning up screwdriver blades? I believe we did.
I have no idea.
Because you can actually get a file and dress them and everything.
Yeah.
If they're rounded over.
There are a couple that could use that. But there's just something prettier about old tools. The one tool, though, I got to say, this brings up a bit of a conversation. I know a few guys, and Tim Rousseau is one of them, who like to use those old-fashioned folding rules. You remember the old carpenter's rules?
Right. Yeah.
And I've never understood that because it does not seem... something about that doesn't seem very accurate to me. And I don't know. It just doesn't feel right. Have you guys ever used those?
No.
I feel like that's more of a carpenter's tool.
I own one because they're kind of cool.
They are cool, yeah.
The important thing is some of them have the little brass sliding thing on there.
Yeah.
That's important because it lets you adjust things. So you can measure diagonals in cases and that kind of stuff. I have one because I did think they were really cool. It's almost a tool bomb for me, except that it's cool and you like it.
Sorry,
you don't
Tim.
want to dislike it, but it doesn't come out of my drawer very often.
I don't see Tim Rousseau use, because I've been to Tim's a couple of times.
He used it.
He's a big metric guy, so he's always busting out these metric rules.
He used it in his recent video workshop. It's coming up.
I admit the last time I used mine, and probably the first time I used it in a long time, was when we were photographing the article on making a table from a single board. I got that out
That's
to
right, for the rough measurements.
and it was only because
Had to look cool,
it
didn't
looked
you?
cool. That was it.
So,
So,
here's
my
the
gosh.
so Mike does a photo, and he does that. If I were to come back from a photo shoot and said, "Well, I just had him use that tool because it looked cool,"
Yeah, but nobody's going to use that. Why didn't you
Mike
have
would
him use a tape measure?
he would lay into you.
I would, yeah.
Yes, he would be so upset.
Yes.
All right.
Like the time I let that guy just wear overalls with no shirt underneath, he was so upset about that.
Please tell me that's not true.
Well, I didn't do it, but we found it in a really old issue of Fine Woodworking.
That
today.
is awesome.
He's actually a very well-known turner today.
Yes, he's a very famous turner, and he's just wearing overalls and no shirt.
That's
None
it.
whatsoever.
We will leave it at that.
Not even a T-shirt. Not even a dickie.
I say we go to our next question, and that is from Dai Ami. There's a reason I'm saying your name like that, Diami. I like to use dye on my projects. Occasionally, I use wood tone dyes. More often, I'd rather the fake color be known as a fake color, so I use a lot of blue, and I'm beginning to use red. I typically use trans tint dye diluted in a half-pound cut of shellac. The trans tint is so concentrated that it only takes a few drops to tint an entire container of shellac. However, even though I cut the tip off the trans tint bottle as close to the end as possible, resulting in the smallest opening, I struggle to dispense controlled amounts of dye. Sometimes a single drop comes out, other times multiple drops. This often results in more trans tint than I want, and it makes mixing 2 matching batches impossible. So that I can achieve the color I want and match it on subsequent mixings, how do I control the amounts of trans tint dye? Now, before you fine gentlemen answer this question, Diami, I'd like to suggest that you go to your worst neighborhood in your town and find a used syringe in some back alley and use a syringe to insert controlled amounts of dye into your shellac.
But Diami lives on Long Island.
I know, he
so
doesn't really have any questionable neighborhoods.
No, you could find it anywhere on Long
But
Island.
I actually do use, interestingly enough, I do, from time to time, I probably shouldn't admit this, but I've been at my allergist's office, and I have swiped a few syringes because I've used them for like controlled amounts of glue or controlled amounts, mixing certain things. Usually it's glue. And they work. I used it for repairing problems in veneer on a veneered humidor once. And it was really, I could just squirt a little bit under a crack in the veneer and just...
It's fascinating, Ed.
Well, they sell the
That's one way to do
syringes
it.
with the little flexible
Yeah.
tips for glue and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, Diami, your little drippy problem, that is one issue to solve. I'm not sure that's your biggest issue. Even if you got exact drops coming out reliably from the chip of your trans tint dye, it's really hard to mix multiple batches of stuff the exact same color.
Right.
Also, I don't know, dyeing shellac, typically when I've heard of adding dye to shellac, it's in very moderate amounts. Like if you're looking for an amber tone, and even then, usually it's sprayed on and not brushed on because it's very difficult to apply a colored shellac evenly either by patting or by brushing without getting streaks and uneven color. So, maybe another solution would be don't dye at the shellac stage. Go ahead and mix up some water-based dyes. And they never go bad. So you can make up a really big batch of water-based dye, keep it on your shelf forever. You don't have to worry about trying to repeat that same color again because you still have more, and you'll probably get a better and more even coating and coverage and color by applying the dye first and then following up with the shellac.
In
here's a
particular,
question.
you'd be using aniline dye in that case. It's usually a powder, right? And you mix it in water and...
Yeah, I don't know. As trans tint, can you mix that with water?
I don't know.
I know they sell both water and alcohol.
But you could also mix the trans tint with
Soluble.
alcohol, denatured alcohol, and apply it that way.
Yeah, it's right.
Why not put a seal coat of de-wax shellac first and then dye over that for a more even tone?
You can do that depending on how saturated a tone you want.
Right, how deep.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're going dark, 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 I find sealing first with shellac.
Cuts it down a bit.
It moderates the tone if you're looking for a more natural look.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're looking to really color that,
then you go
it's
straight.
probably a little too subtle.
Okay.
And there are, there explore different dye options because for example, you could use milk paint as a dye. If you dilute it enough, it will go on as a dye instead of a paint. And it's much easier to apply and control and easier to mix up.
Okay.
Yeah, you're going to get more of an opaque color to it. You'll see the grain through it. It's not quite that really clear.
Well, the more water you add to it, the less opaque it is. So you can you don't have to mix it at the 1-to-1 ratio. You can mix it.
But that's going to lend you a more pastel-y sort of tone, I would imagine. Milk paint is sort of a pastel-y color when you have it dilute. That's been that's what I've noticed. I don't know.
Some milk paints are really saturated.
Mm-hmm.
There are the two brands of milk paints I'm familiar with. One is at the old-fashioned milk paint company. They tend to be more traditional, more muted colors.
Yes.
There's another milk paint company called what?
Milk Paint Emporium?
Newfangled milk paint?
I don't know. Look it up in the Nancy Hiller article. And they're much brighter, more vibrant colors. Really
I know
bright
the
turquoise
company.
and magenta.
But those come pre-mixed, I believe.
I don't know.
They don't?
I don't know.
They come in like little
Well,
milk
if they're water-based, you can
jug
still dilute
looking
them.
I don't
dealy
think so.
bobs. Maybe it's just powder in little milk jugs. Kind of like little metal, like the kind Houdini used to get in.
Yeah, sorry I don't know the name of it right now. But you can get milk paints in more brighter, more saturated colors if you want them.
Yes.
Another question comes from Tom, who writes, I'm currently building a standing desk for a friend of mine. I'm pinning the tenons and have run into a problem. I'm using a brad point drill bit, 1/4 inch, and I'm getting significant tear out starting the holes. The wood is black walnut. The drill bit is sharp. I'm using a hand power drill. What am I doing wrong?
Could be the bit, could be your technique. I mean, you could have a brand new drill bit. If it's not a good quality, it's not necessarily sharp enough to get you a clean entry hole.
Yes.
Probably the bits I've had the most success with, because brad points really range. You can spend, $10, $9 for 7 bits. It's going to be
not good bits.
Serviceable at best.
Yeah.
What is it? The Vortex bits, the brad point bits sold through Lee Valley.
I don't know if they have a brand name, but those bits are good. Yeah.
They have really pronounced wings, really, really sharp cutters.
And that wing sort of scores the...
Yeah, and that's the idea.
The perimeter first.
So technique-wise, make sure your drill is perpendicular to the surface. So with a hand drill, that's going to take a little bit of practice. And then use really light pressure to establish the hole. Once it's established, then go ahead and bear down on it and finish drilling the hole.
But high RPMs.
Yeah, high RPM, because start full speed, but light pressure until you get that outer sort of entry hole established, then drill all the way through. You shouldn't have too many problems with that.
Y'all are assuming, because Ed said hand powered drill.
He actually said, I'm using a hand drill. I'm assuming he's using a hand power drill, although at first I was wondering if he was using like a
bit, a brace and bit.
Not even a brace and bit,
egg
but
beater.
An egg beater.
I would think if it is just an egg beater or a brace, I would think that neither one of those. An egg beater might be able to generate enough RPMs, but I have found that when you turn a brad point bit slowly, it tears out. Yeah. You get that tear out on the entry that it needs to be going fast.
Interesting.
Yeah, because in my drill press, it's got 2 belts, and that's so sometimes you just don't want to deal with that. They change the speed by changing the belt to different sheaves, but so I'll use it at a slow speed, and that's when I get tear out. So high speed is I think critical.
All right,
at least I believe so.
So high RPM, back off the pressure as you start the cut.
Keep it nice and square to the surface.
Buy a drill press.
And if you have a new bit and it doesn't work, try a more expensive new bit.
Okay. All right.
And if that bit doesn't work, get one that's even more expensive and try that one. Or just buy an expensive bit to begin with.
Yeah.
So we get lots of comments on our page in the iTunes store. We also get them through email, and you guys all know the deal. Every couple of weeks, we like to acknowledge those folks who leave constructive criticism as well as words of encouragement up there. So here we go. First one's from Ken, who writes, "Keep up the show. The mix of serious and frivolous is just great. Also fun to see you guys as well as hear you." And from Aaron, "Great podcast. Would love to hear Garrett Hack interviewed sometime." And from George, finally, 4 stars. "Glad most of the sound effects are gone." I think he dinged us on the 5th star for sound effects. So I might have to just play a random sound.
No, he's glad that most of them are gone. He's happy that at least some of them have been retained.
Only the good ones.
Wow.
All right.
There were never any good ones to begin with.
That about wraps it up this week for Shop Talk Live. Thanks to our sponsor this week, Minwax. We'll be back again in 2 weeks on August 14th, 2015 for our next episode. In the meantime, show us a little love by leaving a comment on iTunes, and by all means, click that 5-star rating. Don't forget to send your questions and comments into shoptalk@taunton.com, TAUNTON.com. You can catch the podcast via iTunes, stream it on your computer at shoptalklive.com, or catch us on iHeartRadio. Cheers, everybody.